The Rule of Two was the most radical transformation in Sith philosophy since the Order's very creation. Conceived by Darth Bane after he witnessed the self-destruction of the Brotherhood of Darkness, the Rule of Two declared that there could only ever be two Sith at any given time, a master who embodied the power of the dark side, and an apprentice who craved it. The cycle of succession through betrayal was designed to ensure that the Sith would grow stronger with each passing generation, distilling their knowledge and hatred rather than diluting it among countless rivals. By concentrating their secrets and ambitions into a single line of power, Bane believed that the Sith could avoid the chaos and arrogance that had doomed them in the past centuries. For 1,000 years, the Rule of Two forced the Sith into the shadows. They became patient conspirators instead of marauding warlords, operating as hidden architects of corruption rather than overt conquerors. Their secrecy was not a weakness, it was their greatest weapon. While the Jedi believed the Sith were extinct, the Rule of Two allowed each Dark Lord to train an apprentice in absolute secrecy, creating a lineage of increasingly cunning and powerful Sith. Over generations, this doctrine produced masters who were experts in deception, infiltration, and political manipulation, ultimately preparing the Sith to strike when the Republic was at its most complacent. It was precisely this hidden approach that allowed Darth Sidious to ascend. The Rule of Two taught him patience and the value of working from within rather than attacking openly. As a senator, then chancellor, and finally emperor, Palpatine exploited every weakness in the Republic while concealing his true nature. The discipline of the Rule of Two gave him a means to an end to corrupt Anakin, to engineer the fall of the Jedi, and to transform the Republic into the Galactic Empire. Though Palpatine would eventually come to see this rule as a temporary tool rather than a sacred tradition, it was this system that enabled him to fulfill the Sith's millennia-old dream of galactic domination. Sidious had been the culmination of it all. But this raises a question at the heart of the Sith philosophy. If Anakin Skywalker had truly had the potential to surpass every Sith Lord before him, even to destroy Palpatine himself, why would Sidious invest so much training in him? Why deliberately nurture a rival whose power could eventually eclipse his own? In today's Holocron, my friends, we're not only going to be answering this question, we will also be breaking down why Palpatine never fully trusted the Rule of Two, and how eventually he decided to completely discard it, and why. But before we open the Holocrons and listen closely, we have received a terrible vision. Many who are visiting the archives are not yet a part of our order, so if that's you, reach out with the Force and crush that subscribe button. It is your destiny. The answer lies in the paradox that Darth Bane's Rule of Two was designed to embrace. According to this doctrine, the Sith should only grow stronger if each generation surpassed the last. For the line to evolve, the Master had to accept the possibility of being overthrown. This was not just a risk, it was the intended outcome. The apprentice's ambition, tempered by the Master's cunning, created a cycle of conflict that distills the Sith's power into its purest form. Sidious understood this principle better than anyone, and for much of his life, he would adhere to it, at least publicly. And yet, Palpatine's vision diverged from Bane's in a fundamental way. Sidious believed he could manipulate the cycle without ever falling victim to it. In his mind, Anakin's potential was both a threat and a necessity, a weapon too powerful to ignore. By molding Anakin from a young age, corrupting his attachments, and isolating him from the Jedi, Sidious believed he could channel the power without ever truly relinquishing control. And even if the day came when Anakin's strength could challenge his own, Palpatine planned to transcend death itself, to cheat succession and render the Rule of Two obsolete. In training Anakin, he was not only ensuring the destruction of the Jedi, but also proving to himself that he could master the system that had defined the Sith for 1,000 years. Palpatine thought of the Force itself, and the unnatural circumstances of Anakin's birth as presenting him with a rival, but a rival worthy of his ambition. The legend of the Chosen One, the prophecy of balance, and Anakin's unprecedented potential were in Sidious's eyes, perhaps the Force's final countermove against the Sith's rise. Where lesser Sith Lords may have seen this as a threat to be eliminated outright, Palpatine saw it as a challenge to be mastered. This is where he differed from Darth Plagueis, who wanted the boy dead. But Palpatine saw a greater opportunity, a test of whether his own cunning, his knowledge of the dark side, and mastery of manipulation were truly limitless. In this sense, Anakin was not simply another apprentice. He was an existential obstacle, a living embodiment of destiny that seemed to promise the end of the Sith. But rather than shrink from that possibility, Palpatine embraced it with a kind of cold fascination. He believed that if he could bend Anakin's destiny to his will, if he could corrupt the Chosen One so thoroughly that the very prophecy would become an instrument of darkness, then it would prove beyond a doubt that his power eclipsed every Jedi and every Sith that had ever lived. Palpatine saw Anakin as the culmination of every prophecy, every experiment in alchemy, every ancient legend about beings born to reshape the galaxy, and whether he suspected the Force has created Anakin directly as a counterbalance, or whether he himself had unknowingly triggered the birth through Plagueis' experiments, Sidious recognized that Skywalker was no mere servant. He was a phenomenon, a singular event in the Force that could either destroy or immortalize the Sith. Yet for all of that, Palpatine was never intimidated by Anakin's potential. He believed his superior knowledge of the Sith lore, his mastery of deception, and his patient cultivation of Anakin's emotional weaknesses, that being fear, anger, and attachment, would keep the Chosen One in perpetual chains. Even as he praised Anakin's strength and flattered his ego, Sidious laid the groundwork to ensure that power was never truly turned against him. He exploited Anakin's love for Padme as both a lure and a poison. He isolated him from the Council, feeding his suspicion and pride, and he orchestrated the Clone Wars themselves as a crucible of violence and desperation, a perfect environment to breed a Sith Lord who would be grateful, broken, and utterly dependent. By the time Anakin knelt before him as Darth Vader, the idea that he could rise to challenge Palpatine must have seemed laughably remote. Even if he had escaped Mustafar unscarred, Sidious would have relied on more than simple loyalty to maintain control. He possessed the resources of a galaxy, an army, an imperial network of intelligences, the Inquisitors, hidden dark-side cults that proliferated under his reign. More than that, he had decades of hidden knowledge. He had access to ancient Sith techniques, alchemical rites, and forbidden rituals designed to break minds and to hollow out souls. In his view, these assets would be more than sufficient to subjugate even a being as powerful as Anakin. To Palpatine, Anakin represented not only the Force's ultimate challenge, but also final proof of his supremacy. If he could twist the Chosen One to his will, he would have conquered not just the Jedi or the Republic, but now destiny itself. That was the ultimate ambition, to stand above prophecy, to stand above tradition, all cycles of death and rebirth, to make himself the one true constant in a galaxy forever in flux. In this way, Palpatine's willingness to train Anakin was not done out of naivety, but it was the purest expression of his arrogance, the unshakable belief that no rival, no matter how powerful or preordained, could ever escape the gravity of his control. It is the most striking irony in Sith history that while Palpatine believed he alone had outgrown the rule of two, he ultimately fell into the very same trap that destroyed so many of his predecessors. Palpatine convinced himself the succession was a relic of weaker eras, something only lesser Sith needed to fear. He told himself that his mastery of the dark side, his knowledge of ancient secrets, his control over an empire made him immune to all betrayal. In that belief, he was not so different from his own master Plagueis. Plagueis had also been certain that he was the exception, that through his experiments in manipulating the midichlorians and conquering death, that he had risen above the vulnerabilities that plagued the Sith. He believed he was on the verge of achieving a form of immortality that would make apprentices completely unnecessary. Plagueis didn't even intend on originally training Palpatine. He simply viewed his appearance as a gift from the dark side itself, the same way that Palpatine would later view Anakin. Yet in the end, Plagueis died in his sleep, murdered by his own student. Palpatine's arrogance was merely an echo of this cycle. Like Bane before, like Plagueis before, he believed he had broken the pattern. But the rule of two was not just a system of succession, it was a reflection of a deeper truth. The dark side thrives on conflict. The more power a Sith gathers, the more certain it becomes that their apprentice will one day rise against them. Palpatine thought he could transcend that inevitability, and in the end, he only proved how inescapable it really was. Vader's own relationship with the rule of two was equally complex to his master. When he first embraced the dark side, he did so out of desperation to save his wife, to end the Clone Wars, to impose order on a galaxy plunged into chaos. He did not yet fully grasp that it was a Sith tradition. The apprentice's destiny was to one day overthrow their new master. But for years, Vader was consumed by self-loathing and regret. He served Palpatine less as a partner than as an instrument, a weapon wielded by a master who never let him forget his failures. But as the years wore on, the dynamic would shift. Though Vader's body had been broken, his spirit would gradually harden. He began to see that Palpatine did not truly respect him as any form of a successor. He was not being groomed to inherit a Sith legacy, but to serve as an enforcer until a better candidate could be found. This realization became clearest when Palpatine encouraged rival apprentices and dark-side agents to grow in power behind the back of Darth Vader. Palpatine would even encourage them to disrespect him. Individuals like Mara Jade would prove to be a real potential threat, so Vader would need his own plan. The most striking example was Starkiller, a secret apprentice trained by Vader. Starkiller was not just a contingency plan to assassinate the Emperor, he was a mirror held up to Darth Vader himself, a reminder that to Sidious, no apprentice was indispensable. When Palpatine discovered Starkiller's existence, he did not destroy him. Instead, he attempted to twist the situation to his own agenda, using Starkiller as bait to draw out hidden Jedi and to test Vader's loyalty. This cycle of manipulation and betrayal forced Vader to confront the truth of the Rule of Two. Vader began to recognize that the dark side demanded constant conflict, that an apprentice who never challenged the master was little more than a slave. By the end of his life, Vader no longer wished simply to serve. He contemplated overthrowing Palpatine not only to fulfill the ancient Sith tradition, but to finally claim the agency that he had been denied since Mustafar. In this way, Vader's story closed the circle that Bane set in motion. Even a master as cunning as Darth Sidious, who believed himself the culmination of all Sith ambition, could not escape the fundamental law that power invites rebellion. The Rule of Two was not a set of rules to be outgrown. It was a reflection of the dark side's truest nature, that in the end, there can only be one. But there is yet another dimension to Palpatine's intentions for Anakin, one rarely discussed in the histories of Sith. For all his proclamations of apprenticeship and destiny, Sidious almost certainly never intended to allow Anakin to rule the Empire as any equal. Instead, he saw Anakin as the culmination of centuries of selective breeding, alchemical experiments, and prophecy, a living vessel designed by the Force. And he knew this from the beginning. Palpatine viewed that vessel as a contingency for his own immortality. The technique of essence transfer, the ability to project one's consciousness into another body, was a secret long lost, even to masters like Darth Plagueis. Plagueis had dedicated his life to manipulating the midichlorians, to creating life and prolonging it unnaturally. But he never truly rediscovered the ritual that would allow his spirit to cheat death indefinitely. Sidious, however, was not bound by his master's limitations. Through years of clandestine research, he eventually uncovered this forbidden knowledge preserved in the holocron of Darth Andedu, an ancient Dark Lord who had sealed his consciousness into a hidden vault. And while Dooku served as Sidious's political instrument, he also provided crucial access to Sith archives, artifacts, and obscure histories through his own research and adventures. And after the fall of the Jedi and the Republic, it would be from these sources that Palpatine reconstructed the ritual of essence transfer, surpassing even the achievements of Darth Plagueis. This was the secret that made Sidious confident he would outlast any rival. He no longer needed to fear the decay of his own flesh, or the succession demanded by the Rule of Two. And in the figure of Anakin Skywalker, unburned, unbroken, and unimaginably strong in the Force, he saw not just a servant, but the perfect vessel. A body that could house his spirit unchallenged for centuries. Though he never spoke of these intentions aloud, his actions revealed the truth. Palpatine invested more in Anakin than anyone else. He destroyed the Jedi and the Republic to clear a path for the Chosen One's ascendance. He engineered Anakin's isolation and orchestrated his fall with the precision of a master alchemist, refining a singular, priceless material. And in the final hours of the Clone Wars, he did everything in his power to ensure Anakin would arrive at his side whole, ready, beginning to shape the galaxy. It is the greatest irony of all that his plan was undone not by prophecy or betrayal, but by the molten fires of Mustafar. When Anakin emerged from that crucible shattered, Palpatine's ambitions were forced to adapt. The perfect vessel was gone, replaced by a broken shell whose potential had been forever diminished. And so while Sidious continued to rule and scheme, he never again possessed the single ideal candidate to host his consciousness. Yet, this ambition to take the body of his greatest creation and inhabit it for all of time reveals the depth of his heresy. Where the Rule of Two demanded succession, Palpatine sought permanence. Where Bane taught that the apprentice must one day overthrow the master, Sidious planned to erase that possibility altogether. And in doing so, he demonstrated that for all his cunning, he had become precisely what Bane despised, a Sith Lord so intoxicated by his own power that he believed himself beyond the reach of history itself. Yet, While Bane's rule of two achieved what no Sith Empire ever could, survival and triumph over the Jedi, it ultimately contained the seeds of its own destruction. The system was never designed to create a Sith dynasty that would endure forever. It was meant to refine Sith power through conflict and succession, to ensure that the Order remained strong precisely because it never stopped evolving. Palpatine's greatest error was believing he could freeze that evolution. His conviction that he had outgrown the rule of two was not an expression of strength, but of hubris. In seeking to rule eternally, he rejected the very principle that had allowed the Sith to survive 1,000 years. He believed himself immune to betrayal, immune to consequence, immune to the Force itself. But the dark side always demands a price, and so the cycle that he tried to transcend finally claimed him. In this arrogance, he underestimated Anakin's capacity for redemption and Luke's refusal to surrender to hate. And when he was cast down the reactor core of the Death Star, it was not simply the defeat of a tyrant, it was the total collapse of a philosophy that had decayed into self-worship. Even that, though, was not the end. In the years that followed, Palpatine's cloned body returned, defiant and unrepentant. He declared himself immortal, the living embodiment of the dark side, the unending will of the Sith. But in that end, even this resurrection was a hollow one. It was Luke Skywalker, the son of the apprentice Sidious believed he had forever broken, who would finally destroy him. The truth could not be avoided. No ritual, no clone, no hidden contingency could shield Palpatine from the same flaw that had destroyed all of the Sith before him. His arrogance was too vast to contain. His faith in his own invincibility was the most profound weakness of them all. In the final reckoning, Sidious was not the culmination of the Sith's triumph, but proof of their ultimate failure. He had proclaimed himself beyond the rule of two, the end of the old tradition and the first of a new. And in that sense, he was right. He was the last true Dark Lord of the Baneite lineage. He was the dark side's greatest champion, the ultimate expression of the Sith's ambition and their folly. But in believing himself above the cycle of master and apprentice, in imagining that he alone could stand unchallenged forever, Palpatine became exactly what the rule of two had been created to prevent. A master so consumed by his own power that he could no longer see the blade poised at his back. And so in the end, it was not the Jedi or the Republic or the will of the Force that undid him. It was the same thing that had always destroyed the Sith: hubris. And so, my friends, that is why Palpatine did not trust the rule of two, and how it ultimately led to his undoing. But my friends, what are your thoughts? And what do you think would have happened if Palpatine had remained completely loyal to the rule of two? As always, may the Force be with you, and I hope you're having an amazing day.